Hi, this is Alan Gleeson for Crossfadr. In this video, I'm going to be giving you a few do's and don'ts to think about when you're doing a mix. These tips are designed to allow you to get the most from your mix regardless of what plugins you're using. First, let's look at some do's and don'ts when it comes to EQ. Now, EQ is probably one of the most powerful and commonly used tools that we have, and we use it for everything from adjusting the timbre of the material to correcting resonances and unwanted frequencies. So I've got a bass sound here. It's pretty dark. I can see from the spectrum analyzer on my EQ device there that most of the energy is focused below 100 Hz, and then it starts to roll off from there. But the first do and don't is when you're EQing, you should generally always do it in the context of the mix, and don't actually be soloing it and EQing things in isolation. You can make something great by itself, but a mix is a mix, so it's all the elements coming together. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to solo here so we can isolate the sound. So if I thought that the sound was a bit dull or wasn't cutting through enough, I might grab a shelving filter and see here about some of those frequencies I could add in. So I'm boosting quite a lot there. This is the first don't I'm going to talk about, is that when you want to alter something, particularly with something like shelving EQs, rather than boost, actually cut. How an EQ device works is it works on delays. So every time you're using an EQ, particularly when you're boosting, you're introducing delays into the signal, and that can put the signal out of phase with other material that you have contained within your mix. Now by itself, one track, you might not notice this, but the cumulative effect of doing this in a large mix can build up and put your mix subtly out of phase, so that when it's summed to mono, or just from general listening, various elements won't be coming through or will disappear in the mix. So if I reset all my gains again, so rather than doing something like this, don't do that. Instead, do a cut. Often we don't want to actually cut because it makes things sound smaller or weaker. But like the volume control on your stereo, when you've made the cut, all you then need to do is either on the device itself increase the gain, or on the channel itself just actually give it a bit of a gain boost. So when I bypass, so it's giving it more definition, and I've achieved that by applying a cut rather than a boost. Second EQ example I'm going to look at is on these chords here. I'm going to call up another EQ device, and any EQ device that you're using, because it's an important part of tonally shaping the mix, always use it in the best possible mode that it's available. So with this particular plugin, I'll put it into natural phase. If I was, say, using the Ableton one, I would make sure that oversampling is turned on, so the device itself is performing the best that it can do. So when I go back to this device, what I'm going to do here is think about tonally shaping or enhancing the sound. So if I wanted to brighten up the mix, one thing you don't do when you're boosting is you don't use a very narrow cue. Apart from it not shaping the whole signal, it will start to actually pick out resonances in the material, creating a very unwanted sound. When we're boosting, we always want to use wider cues, so we're affecting more harmonics at the same time, and the overall result is more natural. The only time we actually do use narrow cues is that if there was a particular resonance in here that I wanted to remove, I could dial into that particular frequency and then, say, invert the gain to actually get rid of that. Now, when you're boosting with a narrow cue, it's something you should never do, particularly at higher frequencies, because that's when our hearing is more sensitive. Sometimes down in the very low frequency range, if you wanted to, say, maybe pick out a harmonic in a kick drum and emphasize that. In those cases, sometimes it's okay to do it, but only by a few decibels. The next do and don't I'm going to look at is in terms of dynamics control. So I'm going to go into my drums and look at my kick drum. I'll just solo the drums. Come across here. So this applies to whether you're using a compressor, a limiter, or some sort of multiband dynamics. So I'll turn on my compressor here. I'm just using Ableton's vanilla one. So by default, it has this makeup gain turned on. As soon as I start to apply compression, you can see on my meter over here that it's making the signal actually louder. I'll reduce the compression again. You can see it's dropping down. So rather than evening out the gain, it's actually giving it a gain boost. And everyone knows that the louder something sounds, we perceive it as more powerful, going to have more energy in the mix. But the idea when you're applying compression is that you're actually controlling dynamics. You're not actually making something louder. The reason that you can make it louder is that after you've controlled the dynamics, you can then maybe adjust your output gain or adjust the gain on your actual channel. But while I'm actually using the dynamics device, I don't want to actually hear any gain boost. So I don't want to have the makeup on, and I do want to control it manually here with my output. So it means when I'm applying my compression, so I'll do something quite severe here. Maybe I want to do a bit of kind of transient shaping to alter the shape of the overall kick drum. So I listened to it before. So I can see my peak there is at minus 5.3. And then when I engage the compression, I actually use the output gain here. To dial in the setting that I want. So that we're nearly exactly the same there. And I'm hearing the effect of the compression rather than hearing a gain boost, and I make a better judgment on what I'm dialing in here is appropriate or not, or giving me the result that I require. So not all dynamics devices have the option to disable the makeup gain. A lot of limiters have it built in automatically and you can't change it. In that case, you should be finding another way, maybe combining that device with a utility device or something to control the gain so that you're actually only hearing the effect. The next do and don't area we're going to look at is in terms of gain staging in a mix. So I'm going to switch over to an example session for this. So gain staging relates to the input and output levels that are coming in and out of your channels and devices. In the days of purely analog equipment, you were always trying to get the level as close to zero or peaking or distortion as possible in order to preserve the signal to noise ratio. But nowadays, with 24-bit signal and higher internal bit resolution and sample rates, we can afford to reduce these levels and not worry about our signal to noise ratio. But I often see it when I'm mixing and mastering other people's material that the mix and master is not sounding as pristine as it could related to incorrect gain staging. So I'll give you an example here. So on my first channel here, I've got a white noise generator, displaying a MIDI clip there, triggering operator, generating white noise. And rather than it go to the master channel, I'm going to route it to the second channel here, which I've labeled submix. And I'm going to put the audio from to no input because I just want to monitor what's coming from this channel here. So this channel here will be functioning as a master. I'm going to be using this for monitoring. So when I start to play the first clip, so you can see that it's just peaking below zero on this, and we're getting the exact same on the other channel here. Let's take it down just a tiny bit. Yeah. Reset it there. So we're just under zero there on this track. So obviously most of the mixes that you're going to be working on, they're not going to contain a single track. So imagine you had an 8-track mix and all your inputs are coming in at zero. So I'll duplicate this track 7 times. So now we've got 8 tracks. And now when I play all of these, just turn down my master a bit. Now we can see that we're actually overloading our submix by 11.7 decibels. So if you're recording all your inputs at zero, it means that you're going to get distortion on your master channel. So the way around this, let's just use this as a measurement. I'll select all my channels and I'll see how much I have to reduce this in order to get it just to below zero. So that's it's hovering around zero there, and we had to reduce all these channels by minus 11 decibels. So obviously you want to aim to start off when you're working on a mix to have all your faders at zero. Obviously things will come up and down, but you don't want to have everything say down at minus 48 so you're not overloading your master. 8 channels, that's not a lot. Maybe let's see if we duplicate this a few more times. Let's go up to say something like 24 channels, like a much bigger mix. So I've just resized my mix so we can see all our channels and our submix channel. So we've got 24 channels. This might be something that a bigger mix, maybe you don't have all 24 channels playing at the same time. But now when I play all these clips, you can see that again we're into distortion. And so let's see how much we have to turn this down by in order to get it just below zero. So around there. And if I open up one of these channels here, we can see that we had to reduce the channels by 17 decibels. So obviously when we're working on a mix, we're not working on a master, we don't want it to be peaking around zero. Generally we might want it to be maybe somewhere between -6, -8 is a good kind of guideline. So let's see how much we need to bring it down in order to get it that level. So around that area there. So we had to reduce all these channels by -23. So that would be a guideline. If you're going to be recording a mix that's quite large, that your input level for the channels that you're going to be recording onto, they should be peaking at around minus 23 decibels as a guideline. Now the other reason you want to do this gate staging is that when you're actually using various plugins. Now not all plugins actually function the same, especially nowadays. A lot of them are emulations of analog equipment, and you'll probably know when you're using analog equipment, when you're plugging into something, you don't want to overload or distort that input because you're going to get distortion out again. You want a clean signal going in with no distortion so that you can process it cleanly and get the result out of it that you actually want. The same goes when you're using plugins. So if I was to call up, say, a device here, say something like a compressor, say just one of Ableton's ones, the issue that we have here, so when I'm playing a sound here, I've got an output meter, but I don't have an input meter on the device. If I was to put that up to 0, or even push that even further, even though the internal bit resolution is higher, so we mightn't actually hear distortion, the resolution of the device itself might not actually be that high, and distortion might occur as a result of that. So again, the idea is to reduce your input so that you're getting a healthy, clean signal going into the device. And then if it's not loud enough, you can always adjust your output afterwards. So all these processes, even though it might only be adding a small bit of distortion, they're cumulative and they can degrade your mix, reducing its fidelity. So although you're working in a digital system, a good analogy to think about is to actually treat it like an analog system. You don't want to overload your inputs, you don't want to overload your outputs, whether they're the actual channels or the actual devices that you're actually using. And the final do's and don'ts I'm going to talk about is when it comes to using effects. So typically when we're using effects, we're using send effects, or we might be using insert effects. And a lot of these effects by default are designed to be stereo effects. But overuse of stereo effects almost has the opposite effect of producing what they call big mono. So too many stereo effects defeats the purpose of using these effects to create a wider stereo image. So a better approach is to use a balance of stereo and mono effects. So on my drums here, if I go to my clap sound, so it already has a bit of reverb on it. Just going to take that off. So reverbs tend to take up a lot of space in the mix. Often what you can do is actually don't use reverb and use something like a simple delay, which, reverb is just more and more delays. So by using something a bit simpler, it takes up less space in the mix, but it still has the effect that you're after, adding more space to the actual sound that's been applied to. So I have a simple delay here. So I'll send some of the clap into it. And I'm setting the time manually in milliseconds. So I'm not creating an actual delay type effect or echo. I'm creating a more spatial effect. So I'm going to bring this down quite low. And what I'm going to do is going to pan the clap to one side. And then I'm going to pan the effect to the other side. So if you time this to the actual BPM of your song, I'm using this tool, Max for Live tool here, that I can do something like, say, like a 148, 48.9 milliseconds. You can actually hear the clap moving across the stereo image. That's actually a bit too much effect. I want this to be quite subtle. So that's without the effect. That's actually with the effect. So it's adding some spatial depth to the sound without having the effect of something like reverb kind of washing out the sound. So using simple tools like this, using delay rather than reverb, it takes up less space in the mix. So it means you can apply more of these subtle effects to different elements in the mix, and it creates a wider image rather than creating this big mono effect. So also with these type of techniques and just simple panning, when I want to create stereo depth within a mix, I reach for these, and I do use these type of processes, and I stay away from processes such as plugins that claim to do some magic widening techniques, because they invariably always mess with the phase of the signal and can potentially put your mix out of phase, making it less mono compatible. So I hope you find these couple of tools useful for enhancing your mixes and getting most out of the tools that you're actually using. The final do and don't is do experiment with these. Use them as guidelines, but not rules. Never treat them as dogma, and do whatever works in a mix to get your voice coming through in your music. It's also a good idea to use reference music to help you stay focused. So when you are using these type of processes and experimenting with them, that you have something to reference back to, so you know when you've gone too far or your mix is turning to garbage. This has been Alan Gleeson for Crossfadr. Remember to like and subscribe these videos and turn on that notification bell to keep updated on our latest videos.